Good morning, Noah. My voice is going what it does every 4 years. It's starting to go because I did podcast after podcast yesterday, hit after hit yesterday after the show. So, excuse my voice. I just had on Dr. Oren from Israel. He has great trouble with Kamala Harris' rhetoric about Israel, and he is very confident that Donald Trump will support Israel, though he's a deal maker and he wants to get stuff done. How do you think supporters of Israel, and I am one who's not Jewish, as are you, will be voting in this election? Will it increase significantly their margin of support for Trump than in the past?
I don't know if it'll increase his margin significantly, but because I just don't think foreign policy is much of a voting issue for most Americans, with the exceptions of situations in which American soldiers are coming home in body bags, or if the United States is embarrassed abroad. And I think right now we have several proxy conflicts in which the United States is involved peripherally, but not necessarily directly. So does it matter? Yeah, it matters on the margins. The thing about this election is it's so close that everything could matter, even the stuff that shouldn't matter. Gary Schmendlick slips on a banana peel and costs Donald Trump the state of Pennsylvania. If this is as close as it looks in polling, and we take polling at face
That didn't
value,
actually happen. I want to assure people that didn't actually happen. No, what
not
did
yet.
you make of what did you make of Joe Biden's garbage comment and the cleanup, which I don't think is much of a cleanup, occurring on aisle 3?
So I don't think if you were inclined to be charitable, and I don't think it is very charitable, but nevertheless, if you were inclined to say, well, he was probably just trying to condemn the person whose remarks he was actually talking about in that moment, I don't know what that gives the president. It's not exculpatory. It's an indictment of his chronic absent-mindedness, exactly what got him booted off the campaign in the first place, and what should eject him from the presidency right now. It's not exactly something that'll benefit Joe Biden necessarily to say, well, he just tripped on his words. He trips on his words all the time, and a president's words matter. And there's probably a lot of voters who are more persuadable, just like the joke at MSG, who are persuadable voters who are voting on their own personal interests, tangible, real material interests this year, who aren't going to be persuaded by that. Again, it matters on the margins. And if it matters on the margins, I think between competing garbage comments, which is what we have to adjudicate now in the last week of this election, on net, balance goes to Donald Trump, because who is energized by those remarks? If we're talking about partisan base voters, you're talking about the people who are insulted. Then you've got individuals who are young, male, likely disproportionately exposed to alternative media venues, who are already primed to support Donald Trump, and they had a positive impression of him. But they didn't have a negative motivating factor really until now. Now they have Joe Biden going out there and saying garbage people. And that's likely to get them off the couch. When it comes to the Puerto Rican voters who might be enthused to vote against Donald Trump by virtue of those comments in MSG, you're
He
talking
did
about the
not
Puerto
make
Rican
them.
population in this
He
country.
didn't. I just, in
Right.
case someone's hearing
And
about
Joe
this
Biden,
for the first time, insult comic who ought not to have been
an
the
insult
stage, who's
comic. And
repulsive at every turn. He's a repulsive comic. Should not have been there, but he said them, not Donald Trump. Go ahead.
we're analyzing this dispassionately, totally bloodlessly, as analysts are wont to do. And if we were to say that, you're saying, okay, well, the Puerto Rican population in this country is large, but disproportionate, but inefficiently allocated in states in electoral terms. The biggest population in a swing state that's Puerto Rican is Pennsylvania. Matters a lot. The state of Pennsylvania. But on balance, I would say the majority of the people who Donald Trump activates by popularizing Joe Biden's quote is more electorally advantageous to him, because it's exactly the people he needs to motivate: young male voters who are less enthusiastic to turn out than young female voters who disproportionately vote for Kamala Harris. So if you're adjudicating this on balance, I would say Donald Trump has the on balance advantage on this. But again, it's going to be small.
Let me talk to you about never Trumpers. Now, Jamie Weinstein needed somebody to make the case for Trump. I've known Jamie for a long time. He was a guest host on the program until he became Never Trump in 2015. And he's a friend. He's been a guest in my house. I like Jamie. Jamie's moved to LA, and he begged me, because he couldn't find anyone to make the case for Trump, because most Trump people, and I voted for Trump already, don't want to bother with the Never Trumpers because they're unmovable. But I did an hour with Jamie last night, even with this voice, to try and tell people the Department of Defense is at 2.9%. It's going to go to 2.5% minimum under Kamala. That's the office, Congressional Budget Office. Her judges will be horrible. Deregulation will not occur. She doesn't have a clue. She can't communicate. By the way, previous question. Have you watched the Club Shay Shay podcast interview with Kamala Harris yet?
No, I have not. There's so many of these alternative media podcasts I have not consumed because it's just hours and hours of your time. And as you
Take
know, and
my
I know,
word
at this
for
time
it.
in the election year, you don't have it.
Take my word for it. Shannon Shay, Shannon Sharp, tried to be as friendly to Kamala Harris as possible, and she hits bottom in this interview. That's why they taped it last week and dropped it on Sunday night at like midnight. So, um, do you think any Never Trumpers will change? No, I don't know if you're a Never Trumper or not. I really just genuinely don't know. And so, do you think any Never Trumpers will change on the basis of my arguments about the future security and prosperity of the United States?
I think that's where most skeptical Republicans of Donald Trump are, and I think that's frankly why they're skeptical of Donald Trump. Those who have a clear-eyed view of how his first term went and what they like about his first term are apprehensive about the second term because the architects of those successes are unloved in Donald Trump's orbit. The feeling is quite mutual. That apprehension is real, and it doesn't do anybody on the Republican side any good to dismiss it. It is based not in affect and emotion and sentiment and personal status, as they so often claim. The people who are critical of Republican skeptics of Donald Trump. It is based on their analytical assessment of his behavior and the personnel around him who will make policy. Totally
No,
rational.
wait, I got to push back, Noah. I know John Kelly's gone. Jim Mattis doesn't like him. I know that. But Mike Pompeo is out campaigning for him. Robert O'Brien is out campaigning for him. The team that John Radcliffe is DNI, Rick Grinnell is acting DNI. They're out campaigning for him. They're close to him on the campaign. I'm very confident of his national security team going forward.
Okay. Well, I'm not necessarily as confident in that team. I will be surprised if Mike Pompeo, for example, is let back into the fold and has a portfolio in the Trump administration that's relevant and matters. But I'm willing to be surprised. Nevertheless, to your question, the Harris campaign, we must assume, sees in its data some softness in these Republicans. That's who they've been appealing to rhetorically only over the last couple of weeks. But their appeals are not very creative. They're certainly not conceding any territory to ideological right-wing conservatives who are patriotic, want to see a confident, extroverted American presence on the world stage, want to see limited government at home. She's not giving them anything to vote on. So while she knows they exist, she's not giving them anything to hang their hats on in order to become Democratic voters for the first time in their life. So I don't necessarily. So while I think they exist, sure. Is she making inroads among them? I would be surprised. And if you had to default one way or the other, I would think they, along with most undecided voters at this stage, will lean back on their priors and say, well, listen, my political and policy preferences are not going to be well served by this Democratic administration because it wasn't served by this Democratic administration. It's if past performance is indicative of future results, and I think that's also logical. That's where most
Noah,
of
do you
these
think
dissatisfied
Kamala Harris
Republicans will
has the
default.
minimum skills to be president? This is my key point with everyone. There's a minimum set of skills to be president. One of them is that you be able to communicate with the American people at least some of the time. Does she have the minimum skill set?
No, she doesn't have the minimum basic skill set, and I don't think that's necessarily the first quality she doesn't have that I would look for in a president. I don't think she has the judgment or or cleverness or adroitness to navigate a situation in real time that is complex and dangerous and requires that kind of confident thinking rooted in experience and intellectual adeptness. She just lacks it. But the problem here for people who are still on the fence about this election is that while they may concede that Donald Trump has the skill set to navigate a thorny environment that requires really, adept maneuvering, they don't think he's qualified to be president because he abdicated his oath of office, Hugh. I know you don't agree
Well,
with that,
Jamie kept bringing that up,
but
and
a
I
lot of
kept
people do
saying
who are skeptical of the
that is
president.
an opinion. A lot of people bring that up to me. That is an opinion based upon the 1-6 committee, and I refuse. I absolutely, because I'm a lawyer. Anything produced by a process that lacks basic minimal due process um, safeguards, and Nancy Pelosi removed all of those, does not persuade me. I want to
Yeah,
ask
it
you one
doesn't
more
persuade
question,
me
Noah, so,
either,
so don't go
because
anywhere.
Republicans have rejected the Blue Ribbon Commission, which would have been the bipartisan thing that they didn't want to have. They wanted to
But
have
that's
results
not
that were
Trump's.
partisan.
that's not Trump's fault because they did not like the makeup of the Blue Ribbon Commission. The Blue Ribbon Commission could have been done, and Nancy Pelosi ought never to have done the 1-6 Commission. I am back with Noah Rothman of National Review, who's my canary in the coal mine. Noah, I've been begging people who know the former president to make judges part of the pitch again, and it isn't because there's no vacancy on the Supreme Court. It got him elected in 2016. I'm absolutely convinced that the vacancy created by the untimely death of Scalia and held open by Mitch McConnell got him elected. So judges they're not talking about him. Do you have any sense of how radical Kamala Harris's judges would be and how different they would be from Trump's judges?
I think they would be quite radical. We can't know because neither candidate has really elaborated on their thoughts on the judiciary in this race. There's a lot of things that are still big question marks, like both candidates' approach to China on a geostrategic level as opposed to trade. That's still pretty much a black box, and it's a tragedy that it is. I think it would have been very beneficial if Donald Trump would have made that an issue by putting out, for example, another list of potential judges. I'm thinking of my colleague, for example, Dan McLaughlin, who's incredibly sharp, and that's in the judiciary is one of his foremost issues, and he's still uncomfortable with the Republican ticket. I think he'll manage to move himself in that direction, but he'd be far more energetic and enthusiastic for this ticket if it was plainly clear that there would be a set of constitutional originalist judges on a list of Federalist Society approved practitioners who would be, somebody that they would pick for seats on the federal judiciary. That's not forthcoming. And one of the things that is giving people pause on the right who are curious about this issue is that the Federalist Society has really fallen out in MAGA world. It has, for the loudest members of this group, they just lack the gumption and the will to do what is necessary to affect the kind of public policy they want to see from the bench. An activist bench, a la the Democratic side, has become a desideratum for a particular type of very activist pro-Trump Republican, and that turns off constitutionalists and originalists. Is it a primary?
I agree.
Issue?
I'm an originalist,
No,
and I do not want activist judges, but I do want James Ho, and I do want. We've got David Strauss. We've got, of course, the wonderful Twitter judge who's no longer a Twitter judge because he joined the Fifth Circuit, Don Willett. There are others like them that they could have named, but I think the fear, if I haven't talked to Chris LaCivita about this or Susie Wiles, I think they were afraid about talking about judges would have brought up Dobbs, and they're afraid of Dobbs, and they shouldn't be afraid of Dobbs. But I have no influence. But that's what I think that's a reasonable logic.
That's a reasonable thing to think about, and just about any judge would exacerbate that tension because they probably have a pro-life record, or at least would be inclined to support legislation that would defer to the states, and that's what Democrats don't want. They want a national abortion ban or national abortion law that would codify Roe and expand Roe. So you're probably right on that. My fear, and perhaps it's slightly unfounded as you suggest, but my fear is that this movement is deferring much more towards the J.D. Vance side of the ledger, which is not pro-limited government, which wants expansive government, which wants activist government, which is far more populist and promises and argues not that the federal government is doing something wrong under Kamala Harris and therefore we should not do it, but rather the federal government is doing something wrong under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and therefore we should do its opposite. The wrong people are benefiting from this disbursement of federal.
We're out of time, no, but you've just persuaded me to try and book J.D. Vance because I know J.D. pretty well. He is an originalist. He is not an activist. He believes in Congress legislating, not agencies. And I think he might. But that's a good concern to have articulated. I hadn't thought about that. I think that's a very good concern, and I will try and do that. Jay, thank you, Noah Rothman. Thank you so much. Go over and listen to Noah on The Editors most days. Read his work at National Review Online. Thank you, Noah Rothman.